The 122 mm howitzer M1938 was a Soviet 121.92 mm howitzer. The weapon was developed by the Design Bureau of Motovilikha Plants, headed by F.F.Petrov, in the late 1930s, and was in production from 1939 to 1955. The M-30 saw action in World War II, mainly as a divisional artillery piece of the Red Army. Captured guns were also employed later in the conflict by the German Wehrmacht and the Finnish Army. Post-World War II, the M-30 saw combat in numerous conflicts of the mid to late 20th century in service of other countries' armies, notably in the Middle East. Development. In 1930, Red Army authorities started to look for a new divisional-level howitzer to replace the pre-World War I-122 mm howitzer M1909 and 122 mm howitzer M1910. Although both pieces were eventually modernized, resulting in the 122 mm howitzer M1909-37 and the 122 mm howitzer M1910-30 respectively. These upgrades did not address some shortcomings in the original designs. The first attempt to develop a new howitzer was made by the KB2 Design Bureau under the supervision of German engineers. The design, known as Lubbock, reached trials in 1932 and in 1934 was adopted as the 122 mm howitzer model 1934. It had a .23 caliber barrel, a maximum elevation of 50 degrees, traverse of 7 degrees, and a combatant traveling weight of 2,250 and 2,800 kilograms respectively. Like its predecessors, Lubbock had a fixed trail carriage, and although it was equipped with suspension, its wheels lacked tires, limiting towing speed to only 10 km/h. Nevertheless, it was undoubtedly superior to the M1910-30, which remained in production until 1941. However, after 8 pieces were built in 1934-1935, production was stopped for unclear reasons, possibly relating to the disbanding of KB2. In the mid-1930s, the main artillery directorate considered a switch to 105 mm guns as used by some other armies. A smaller shell meant that the gun could be lighter and consequently more mobile. On the other hand, a 105 mm gun would also be less powerful. Moreover, there was no Russian or Soviet experience with 105 mm ammunition, while for the 122 mm the country already possessed both production lines and large numbers of already manufactured shells. Finally, in 1937, the RKKA head of General Staff II. Egorov supported retaining 122 mm ammunition. Consequently, 3 howitzers were trialed in 1938-1939. The Design Bureau of UZTM, which was ordered by GAU to design the new howitzer, developed a piece designated U-2. Similar projects were privately undertaken by the design bureaus of Motovilikha Plants, headed by F.F.Petrov, and by the No. 92 plant under V.G. Graben. The U-2 reached trials on 5 February 1939 and was rejected because of insufficient carriage strength and inferior ballistics. The F-25 project was closed by GAU on 23 March 1939 as GAU considered it redundant to the M-30, which had reached trials earlier. The latter, after being returned several times for revision, was finally adopted in September 1939 as the 122 mm divisional howitzer M1938. Its GAU index number was 52G463. A.B. Shirokkorad, a well-known author of books detailing the history of the Soviet artillery, has claimed that the F-25 could have been developed into a better gun than the M-30. Grabin's design was about 400 kilograms lighter, had a greater traverse and had better ground clearance. All this was achieved, according to Shirokkorad, without sacrificing ballistics. Considering how long it took to finish the development of the M-30, the F-25's schedule possibly did not significantly lag behind. There is no official document explaining the advantages the M-30 had over the F-25. Factors that could have influenced the GAU decision were: unlike the F-25, the M-30 was not equipped with a muzzle brake, while softening recoil and thus allowing for a lighter carriage. The muzzle brake has a disadvantage of redirecting some of the gases that escape the barrel toward the ground where they raise dust, revealing the gun's position. Another side effect of a muzzle brake is the increased muzzle blast behind the gun, adversely affecting the working conditions of its crew. The M-30 used many elements from existing guns, most notably the interrupted screw breech block of the M1938. Since at the time Soviet industry had experienced major difficulties with manufacturing sliding breech blocks for large-caliber guns, the lowered technical risk can be considered a significant advantage. The stronger carriage of the M-30 could be used, and in fact was used, for more powerful artillery pieces. Production. Mass production of M-30 howitzers began in 1940 at Plant No. 92 in Gorky and No. 9 in Sverdlovsk. The former took part in the production of M-30s only in 1940, building a total of 500 pieces. In addition to towed howitzers, Plant No. 9 produced M-30s barrels for arming Su-122 assault guns. Some 700 barrels were manufactured for this purpose. Mass production continued into 1955. In 1950 to 1960, the M-30 was also produced by Huta Stalowa Wola in Poland, where it was known as WZ. 1938. Description: the barrel of the M-30 was of built-up construction and consisted of a liner, jacket and breech. The breech block was of interrupted screw type with forced cartridge case extraction. The gun was equipped with a hydraulic recoil buffer and hydro-pneumatic recuperator. A panoramic sight was used for both indirect and direct fire. The M-30 had a modern split-trail carriage with leaf spring suspension and steel wheels with rubber tires. It was usually towed by vehicle without a limber. The carriage allowed for a towing speed of up to 50 km per hour on paved road and up to 35 km per hour on gravel or dirt roads, although the gun could also be moved by a team of 6 horses, in which case a limber was used. When the trails were swung open, the suspension locked automatically. In an emergency, it was possible to shoot in a single trail mode, at the price of a drastically reduced traverse. The time required to set the gun up for combat was about 1 to 1.5 minutes. The carriage of the M-30 was later used for the D1 152mm howitzer. Organization and employment. Red Army. The M-30 was a divisional-level howitzer. According to the organization of 1939, each rifle division had 2 artillery regiments, 1 light regiment and 1 howitzer regiment, giving 28,122mm howitzers per division. In June 1941, more battalion of 122mm howitzers was added to the howitzer regiment, bringing the number of guns in each unit to 32. In June 1941, the howitzer regiment was removed and the number of howitzers dropped to 16. This organization was used throughout the war. except in Russian Guards rifle divisions, which from December 1942 had 3 artillery battalions, totaling 12 howitzers. From December 1944 they received an extra howitzer regiment, and from June 1945 rifle divisions were reorganized identically. Mountain rifle divisions in 1939–1940 had 1 battalion of 122 mm howitzers. From 1941 they received instead 1 artillery regiment with 24 howitzers, but in early 1942 only 1 battalion remained. From 1944 howitzers were removed from mountain rifle divisions. Motorized divisions had 2 mixed battalions, totaling 12 howitzers. Tank divisions had 1 battalion with 12 howitzers. Cavalry divisions until August 1941 had 2 batteries of 122 mm howitzers, totaling 8, before the divisional artillery was removed. Until late 1941, rifle brigades had a battery of 4 122 mm howitzers. 122 mm howitzers were also used by the howitzer brigades of the reserve of the main command. By the 1st of June 1941, 1,667 M-30s were in service, comprising only a fraction of the RKKA divisional howitzers. As the war progressed, the share grew rapidly due to mass production and because many older guns were lost in combat in 1941–42. M-30 howitzers were primarily employed for indirect fire against enemy personnel. They were also used against field fortifications, for clearing minefields and for breaching barbed wire. The fragmentation shells presented a danger to armored vehicles. Fragments created by the explosion could penetrate up to 20 mm of armor, enough against thinly armored vehicles. The shells could also damage chassis, sights or other elements of heavier armored vehicles. For self-defense against enemy tanks, a heat shell was developed in 1943. Before 1943, crews were required to rely on the high explosive action of the regular ammunition, with some degree of success. According to a German report from 1943, even a Tiger was once heavily damaged by Su-122 assault guns firing high explosive shells. M-30 howitzers were towed by a variety of means: horses, oxen, Soviet and Lend-Lease trucks, the Stalinet Z5 and YAR-12 purpose-built light artillery tractors, and occasionally manhandled by Soviet artillerymen themselves. The gun was eventually replaced by the 122 mm howitzer D-30 after the latter was adopted for service in 1960. A small number of operational M-30 howitzers are still present in Russian Army ordnance depots. They are being gradually withdrawn from reserve. M-30s featured in many Soviet movies used for novice artillery crew training. These movies were made in the 1960s when more modern D-30 howitzers were becoming available. However, the M-30 was considered by authorities as much more suitable for training purposes. The movies are still in use despite the absence of M-30 howitzers even in practice exercises. Other operators. A number of M-30s fell into the hands of the Wehrmacht in 1941, 1942 and were adopted as 12 2 cm S. F.H.396 heavy howitzers. Germany began mass production of 122 mm ammunition for these and other captured howitzers, producing 424,000 shells in 1943, 696,700 in 1944 and 133,000 in 1945. Some captured M-30s were used in the Atlantic Wall fortifications. The Finnish army captured 41 guns of the type and adopted them as the 122 H-38. These guns fired 13,298 shells in combat. Only a few pieces were lost. The gun was well liked. Some were used for training or stored in depots until the mid-1980s. After World War II, the gun was supplied to many countries around the globe. With the Egyptian and Syrian armies, it saw action in the Arab-Israeli wars. Some of these guns were captured by Israel, although it is unclear whether they were ever employed by the Israeli Defense Forces. The People's Republic of China organized their own production of M-30 howitzers under the Type 54 designation. According to Ian V. Hogg, the M1938 howitzer must surely be the most prolific piece of artillery in history. Current operators. According to Jane's Armor and Artillery, the M-30 and the Type 54 are still being used by the following countries: Afghanistan, N.A. Armenia, N.A. Algeria 60, Bangladesh 20+, Bolivia 36 Type 54, Bosnia and Herzegovina 3, Cambodia Type 54, Congo 10, Croatia 45, Cuba N.A., Czech Republic 25 VZ 38/74 in reserve, Egypt 359, Ethiopia 360, Macedonia 108, Moldova 17, Hungary 230, Iraq 38/68 m, Indonesia N.A., Iran Type 54, Iraq N.A., Kyrgyzstan 37, Kurdistan Peshmerga, Laos 20, Lebanon 33, Mongolia N.A., Mozambique 24 M-30 and D-30, North Korea, Pakistan 490 Type 54 in service with the Pakistan Army, People's Republic of China Type 54, Poland 2WZ, 1938-1985, Romania 204, Russia 4000 in reserve, Sahrawi Republic 13 Est, Sudan 24 M-30 and 76 Type 54, Slovakia 46, Syria 150 Est, Tanzania 24-100 Type 54, Uganda 18, Ukraine 3 in reserve, Uzbekistan 540, Vietnam N.A., Yemen 50, Zimbabwe 24 Type 54. Variants. Former Soviet Union M-30 slightly modified variant was used as the main armament of the Su-122 assault gun. U-11A gun with identical ballistics but equipped with a more compact recoil mechanism for easier mounting in vehicles. It was tried on the experimental Su-122M and rejected due to insufficient reliability. A variant of the same gun was also mounted on the experimental Obiek 234 tank, also known as Joseph Stalin No. 2. D6, another vehicle-mounted gun with identical ballistics. It was used on the experimental Su-122II and, like the U-11, proved unreliable. People's Republic of China Type 54 license version. Type 54-1 slightly improved version. Poland WZ 1938-1985 existing WZ 1938 that was fitted with a caster wheel, PG09H sight and a second firing mechanism for direct fire. Romania M30M. In the 1980s, Romanian Army M30s were upgraded with new, larger pneumatic wheels, new brakes, a new optical sight for direct fire and a second height sighting mechanism for anti-tank combat. These upgraded howitzers were designated M30M. Self-propelled mounts. Former Soviet Union. The M-30 was mounted on the following armored fighting vehicles: Su-122, the Soviet medium assault gun built on a T-34 chassis. The mass production continued from December 1942 until September 1943. In total 638 Su-122s were built. SG-122, Soviet self-propelled artillery vehicles based on captured German PZKP F.W.3 Stug-3 AFVs. About 20 were built in the early months of 1943. 12 2cm Kanonaufger Schutzwagen Lorraine Schlepper, the German self-propelled artillery vehicle, based on a captured armored French artillery tractor. There was at least one vehicle of this type, which fought in France on a railroad car as part of a German armored train. People's Republic of China Type WZ-302 combination of the Type 54 a Type 54-1 with the tracked vehicle Type B531. The military designator is Type 70 SPH. The initial model had only 4 road wheels, but the improved Type WZ-302A Type 70-1 has 5. The final production model with new signals equipment is known as Type WZ-302B Type 70-2. All models have a basic load of 40 rounds of 122 mm. Summary. In the M-30, RKKA units finally received a modern divisional howitzer which successfully combined increased firepower and better mobility with reliability and ease of use. A summary of its employment by the Red Army was provided by Marshal G.F. Odensov, who said, "Nothing can be better." The long post-war employment of the howitzer is additional testimony to its combat and operational utility and effectiveness. It is hard to compare the M-30 directly with contemporary foreign guns since the artillery of France, Germany and United States employed in similar roles was either the much smaller 105 mm or much larger 150 to 155 mm caliber guns. Howitzers of similar calibers existed, but most of those were World War I era pieces, such as the Vickers 114 mm howitzer used by the Finnish Army. Naturally, 150 mm howitzers were more powerful, but much heavier than the M-30, while 105 mm pieces were lighter but the smaller shells contained less explosive. The most direct German equivalent was the 10.5 cm LEFH-18 light howitzer, weighing 1,985 kilograms. It had a maximum elevation of 42 degrees, muzzle velocity of 470 meters per second and maximum range of 10,675 meters. In the upgraded LEFH-18 40th version, muzzle velocity was improved to 540 meters, elevation to 45 degrees and range to 12,325 meters, about equal in range. The German howitzer had a less powerful He shell, and its smaller maximum elevation made it less effective against dug-in troops, although it also weighed some 400 kilograms less than M-30. Both guns were well suited for mass production with 16.887 M-30s and 15.388 LEFH-18 built in 1941–45. Ammunition data. The M-30 could fire all types of 122 mm howitzer ammunition used by the RKKA, including old Russian and imported shells. During and after World War II, new types of ammunition were developed, notably heat shells. The World War II era heat shell BP460A could pierce 100 to 160 mm of armor at 90 90 degrees. The post-war BP-1 managed 200 mm at 90 degrees, 160 mm at 60 degrees, and 80 mm at 30 degrees. E-frag projectiles of type of 462 that were initially developed for the M-30 howitzer can be fired from modern 122 mm ordnance pieces in a still. In Russian Army service, surviving pieces, M-30 howitzers are on display in a number of military museums and are widely used as memorial pieces. Among other places, the gun can be seen at the following locations: Central Armed Forces Museum and in the Museum of Great Patriotic War, Moscow, Museum of Artillery and Engineering Forces, St. Petersburg, Museum of Heroic Defense and Liberation of Sevastopol on Sapun Mountain, Sevastopol, Nizhny Novgorod, as a memorial piece at Marshal Zhukov's Square. Artillery Museum in Hämeenlinna, Finland, IDF History Museum and IDF Artillery Museum, Israel. Central Museum of the Royal Regiment of Canadian Artillery, Shiloh, Manitoba. Zone 5 Military Museum, Da Nang. In the National Military Museum, Romania, Bucharest. Captured piece at the War Museum, Huntington Park, Newport News, Virginia, USA.